Good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name is Trish Mosser. I am a senior research scholar here at Columbia School of International and Public Affairs. I'm a former central banker. My background is in financial stability. I'm very pleased to welcome you along with my two co-sponsors, my colleague Jason Healy, also a senior research scholar here at Columbia CISA, and Anna Kovner, who's a vice president and head of financial stability analysis at the New York Fed's research department. This is our third State of the Field conference on cyber risks to financial stability. We started, CISA and the New York Fed started these conferences about 4 years ago. And our goal has been very much information sharing, getting up to date, finding out what everyone is doing, with the ultimate goal of improving dialogue across what we view as two pretty different worlds. The first world is the world of the practitioners and researchers who monitor and study financial risk and financial stability. And the second world are those who are responsible for monitoring and managing cyber risks. We think both sides and both worlds have a lot to learn from each other. They've learned a lot in the last few years, but I think there's lots more here too. And so to that end, our agenda today is pretty simple. This morning we'll be very, very much focused on what's going on now and what may be happening in the future, and hyper focused on geopolitical risks, which of course is absolutely top of mind for everybody, whether you're worried about economic risks or cyber risks. Tomorrow's sessions will be a little broader. Panel discussions on what are we learning, which will be a bit more about research. What are we doing in both the public and the private sector to improve our defenses and risk management? In addition, we'll have three talks, fireside chats, and a speech this morning from various experts who are very much on the forefront of this. Thank you all for attending. This should be a great 2 mornings. And without further ado, let me turn it over to Anna Kovner and Eric Goldstein. Thank you.
Thank you, Trish. It's my pleasure to join together to welcome you on behalf of the New York Fed as we work together with Columbia to sponsor these robust public-private academic discussions on issues related to cyber risk and financial stability. I'm happy to introduce Eric Goldstein, who serves as the Executive Assistant Director for Cybersecurity for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, known as CISA. In this role, he leads CISA's mission to protect and strengthen federal civilian agencies and the nation's critical infrastructure against cyber threats. Prior to assuming this role, he was the head of cybersecurity policy, strategy, and regulation at Goldman Sachs, leading a global team to improve and mature the firm's cybersecurity risk management program. And he also served at CISA's precursor agency, the National Protection and Programs Directorate. He's a graduate of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and Georgetown School of Public Policy and the Georgetown Law Center. Eric, take it away.
Great, and thanks for the introduction. Thanks so much to Jay and the whole CIPA team. I am really delighted to be here for a few reasons. First of all, because this topic is both so important, so fascinating, and so timely. I have both enjoyed and benefited from the work done by the broad CIPA team in this area, including the 2 recent papers, which I will talk through a bit about how we are actually operationalizing them. I'm also glad to be here, quite frankly, because it's a Zoom meeting, so I can see the attendees, and I am so glad to be able to chat with some of my former colleagues, Danny Macchiatolu, Princewell, TCMAG, just so glad to see your names in a attendee list. This is just such great fun. So I'm really glad to be here. I'm going to talk for 10 minutes or so about not necessarily why we're here, but how we get out of the situation we're in, and what are the steps that the US government, in partnership, in collaboration with the financial sector and broader critical infrastructure, can do to reduce the systemic risks to financial stability that we are facing from ubiquitous cyber insecurity. And then I'm going to open it up for questions. And so I do hope that my former GS or my current CISA colleagues will throw some real curveballs in the mix to keep the event interesting. So the starting point is, it's impossible to have this conversation today without framing it in the lens of Russia's unjust, unprovoked, and tragic invasion of Ukraine, where the risk of nation-state conflict that perhaps some thought were theoretical are obviously not the case, where the use of cyber attacks as an enabler, as a multiplier of kinetic military activity are now increasingly assumed to be the case. And the cascading effects, pardon me, both of cyber intrusions and the broader implications of geopolitical activity, like an unprovoked invasion of a 40 million person democratic state by its neighbor, we now have to bake into our risk models in a way that I think would have been dramatically more speculative even 4 months ago. And I want to pull back to some of the foundational work that the CIPA team and others have done in this space. You know, before this conversation, I took a chance, I took a moment to refresh myself on the two main papers that Jay and the team have written in this area. And I found myself remarking on the resonance of both the implications of cyber risk on financial instability and the recommendations to make progress, and how much those really reflect the environment that we're in. At CISA, the nation's civilian cyber defense agency, we're really looking at this from a few vantage points. The first is, how do we help drive an understanding of the nodes and networks and dependencies, the market structures that, if undermined by malicious cyber activity, could result in cascading impacts within the financial sector and more broadly. And we're doing this in a few ways. First, in partnerships with organizations like the Analysis and Resilience Center, the ARC, to understand what sorts of assets and entities are most critical to specific financial sector functions, and then how can we drive collaborative effort to improve the security and resilience to those functions under all conditions. And the way that we achieve those gains in security and resilience, I think, is really important. And this is really where I'm going to spend the bulk of my time. Because historically, the way that government and the private sector would interact to reduce cyber risk was what I will call the historic public-private partnership model, which I would define, recognizing our Chatham House rules here, although I've said this publicly as well, as episodic, slow, and not scalable. Largely bidirectional between two organizations, and not fit for purpose for the breadth and scale of the risk we're facing. We are trying to dramatically invert that model, and we are doing it at CISA through a forum called the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. And I know many on this Zoom are deeply familiar with this. But for those who aren't, the JCDC really is at its core, a fundamental philosophical shift in how government and the private sector work together to reduce cyber risk, and specifically systemic cyber risk. And we're doing this in two ways. The first is by bringing together government and the private sector, not to share information episodically or ad hoc, but to bring operators together into virtual and increasingly physical collaboration environments to sit side by side and share information continuously and asynchronously at scale. We kicked this work off around the Log4Shell vulnerability in December. We have scaled it up as we collectively have been on heightened alert for cyber threats potentially emanating from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And the tie here to systemic risk is, I think, really simple, that one of the most effective ways that we can reduce the likelihood of a cyber event triggering instability or cascading systemic risks is by making sure that we are catching these events and stopping them earlier in the cascade chain. And the only way we can do this is if we are exchanging real operational information earlier and faster and in a trusted way, where we're not waiting for information to be validated, published, we are sharing it almost immediately and within a trusted group of organizations with the ability to drive down risk at scale. So this is really the first piece here, is moving the partnership model away from one-to-one, slow, episodic, to many continuous, real-time, asynchronous. But the vision we're seeking here is actually much broader. And this really gets to several of the core recommendations in the Brookings paper that Jay and the team pulled together, which is one of the challenges we face in cybersecurity, and I'm sure everybody on this call, this will resonate with to some extent, is we're pretty good in cyber at being reactive, right? Every single day, there's some new zero-day vulnerability, some new campaign that hits the wire. We all run to the flames. We do heroic work. We manage risk. We are much less good at taking a step back and actively planning for what are the most significant systemic risks that we're worried about, identifying the organizations, public and private, with the capability, the resources, the authority to drive down the likelihood and consequence of that risk manifesting, developing a joint plan to achieve that goal, exercising that plan as a collaborative unit, and then executing that plan to reduce risk. That is precisely what Congress established in CISA, in the National Defense Authorization Act about 1.5 years ago, which now is codified in CISA in the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. And it's an extraordinarily novel model. We really did this for the first time around the Russia-Ukraine conflict, where we developed a cyber defense plan with government and the private sector in December, January timeframe. We exercised the plan in January and February, and then when the invasion occurred, we were ready to execute cyber defense operations to protect the nation. This is a model that we think really does scale, that if we can get together the right experts from financial institutions, technology and cybersecurity companies that have extraordinary visibility into cyber risks affecting our nation, and the right cross-section of both government partners and international partners, we can identify those systemic risks that are most likely or most consequential to cause these sort of instability and cascading market effects that we're most concerned about. We can identify the courses of action that we can take collectively between government and the private sector to reduce those risks. We can exercise the courses of action to see if they actually work and are fit for purpose, and then we can move out as a collective. And the key point here is this is not government as the lead actor, as the prime actor. It is government acting as a co-equal partner in a risk reduction effort where the authorities and the resources that government can bring to bear are commensurate with those brought to bear by the private sector. And if we can combine our resources, our authorities, our visibility, that's how we actually make progress towards reducing the sorts of systemic risks that we're facing today. So we are really excited to further build out this model. It is rather new days. This effort was launched at the Black Hat conference last August, so we are at about month 8. But this has to be the model that works, because historic models didn't scale, weren't collaborative, were too slow. And so we're excited to see what we can do with this new philosophy of collaboration and proactive planning. And we think that if you look at this model and layer it against the conclusions regarding systemic risk as codified in the CIPA papers recommendations, we think there is really strong alignment in this being the model to drive some immediate term risk reduction for the long-term risks we're facing. Before I open it up for questions, which is really the most fun part of the conversation, because I have the advantage of 60 or so folks in this Zoom, I do also just want to make a few points about where we are with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And even though we have not yet seen cyber activity targeting the US homeland, we have certainly seen widespread cyber activity affecting Ukrainian networks. We remain in a state of heightened risk, heightened alert, shields up, as we call it. Would encourage every organization, if you haven't already, to please do bookmark, maybe set as your homepage, our CISA.gov Shields Up page, which is the single authoritative source for information regarding the potential for Russian malicious activity targeting the US. I will note even today, actually in about half an hour, we are launching an update to a prior product on destructive malware targeting Ukrainian networks. And that is just an example of, pardon me, the sort of work that we are doing with our partners to ensure that we are providing a single authoritative resource for information regarding the potential cyber effects of this conflict and how every organization in the country should prepare. So with that, thanks again to Anna for the kind intro, to Jay and the team for your extraordinary work, also to Jay for your work on behalf of CISA. I'm really looking forward to taking the next 10 minutes or so, or however long I'm allotted, for a few questions.
Thanks. Folks can put your questions in the Q&A option of the Zoom or in the chat. And maybe while we wait for audience members to ask questions, I'll just ask a quick question. I'm just curious how you think about balancing the importance of communication and information sharing with the risks of a threat actor. You know, the more people you share information with, the more risk that someone else could be aware of the response plan and be able to act to undermine it. How do you think about those questions?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think you know, there's a few parts here. The first I'd note is, you know, if we are able to share operational information more quickly and use that to drive mitigation, you know, that will in general, you know, be an effective mechanism to harden the environment against the adversary. And so, you know, even if that tips the adversary that we understand what they are trying to do and how they are doing it, it is still the case that if we can deploy widespread mitigations, the net effect will still be risk reduction at scale. You know, certainly as we develop these operational plans separate from technical operational network defense information, you know, certainly that is information that we do want to keep reasonably well protected. And so as one example, I mentioned our cyber defense plan that we developed in anticipation of a possible conflict between Russia and Ukraine. That is a non-public document, and that is a document that is shared, you know, with the appropriate handling restrictions and caveats among our partners. But you know, the alternative is to not do the planning. The alternative is to remain in this reactive state where we are not organized for success for the threats we're facing. And so there is certainly some operational security balance there, which we are evolving and certainly are very focused on, but the criticality of planning ahead and exercising would weigh the balance of equities in favor of still doing that work.
Thanks. We got a question from the audience from Sean Lingus. My apologies if I mispronounced both names, who is actually from CNN, who's asking why it is that you think we haven't yet seen an incident in the United States, in the homeland, given the high capabilities from.
Yep. Thanks, Sean. Great to hear from you, and great question. As always, we certainly know that malicious cyber activity is part of the Russian playbook. We also know, first of all, that malicious cyber actors require a specific intent to execute a cyber intrusion. And it may be the case that the calculus of Russian actors is such that a damaging cyber attack against our country is not calculated to be in their interest today. It is also the case that we know that cybersecurity practitioners across the country have made extraordinary investments in improving cybersecurity as part of the nation's Shields Up effort. And so certainly it is our hope that these activities have also contributed to limiting the success of any attempted intrusions that may have occurred. But all that said, we remain concerned about the potential for malicious cyber activity targeting this country, and encourage every organization to maintain their shields up posture and continue implementing the mitigations that we're promulgating on our website.
Thanks. I'm going to combine a question from Jay with a question from Kamal, which I see both of these as relating to cyber and the financial sector in particular. Jay's interested to understand how CISA's new cyber hiring authorities are helping, and if you're able to attract folks with finance sector experience. And Kamal's interested in thinking about your metrics of, measuring how things are.
Awesome questions. Kamal, I apologize for not calling you out in my intro for former colleagues. It is awesome to see your name in the chat, and I hope you are doing great. So both really great questions. To Jay's question, just as some background for the group, one of the real challenges that we face in government is bringing on a talented workforce that reflects the diversity of America in the time frame that we need to meet the mission needs and are competitive to some degree with compensation in the private sector. Congress has provided CISA with some unique authorities to hire people faster and at higher pay grades. We think that this is increasingly going to make a real difference, both in our speed to hire and in our ability to get a bit closer to market salaries. We are still fully moving down the road of fully utilizing these authorities. And so we are determining the breadth of the impact that it will have, but we certainly expect that it's going to make a significant difference in our ability to retain and recruit the best possible talent from across the country. Kamal, your question is a really great one because we have, as many know, really two different stakeholder sets here at CISA. The first is the federal government, where we have extremely strong authorities and visibility, and we are able to actually have, what I would say, real security metrics, right? Where we can look at things like patch rate, we can look at mean time to detect, mean time to remediate, right? The sort of things that CISOs look at to assess security progression and security posture. Outside of the federal space, we don't have that same visibility. And so we are really focused on a few aspects. First of all, looking at the uptake of our products and services. Second, relying upon third-party data so that we can see if there is a security change across sectors that we can correlate to the work we're doing. But a third piece here that I'll call out is the work that we're doing on cybersecurity performance goals, as directed by President Biden's National Security Memorandum 5, which is going to be a new way for organizations to internally narrate and evaluate their progress and their maturity towards defined cybersecurity outcomes. That's not going to be how we evaluate ourselves at CISA, but it is a way that CISA is going to help organizations evaluate themselves and raise the bar for cybersecurity maturity across the country.
Thank you. I would love to keep you on this and ask you a million questions. A lot of things you say are resonating with some of the challenges we're facing at the Federal Reserve and thinking about these same questions. I really appreciate the time you were able to dedicate to speaking to this panel and answering questions. So thank you very much. I'm going to kind of turn the virtual floor over to Jay for the next panel. Thank you so much, Eric.
Thanks so much, Anna. Thanks, Jay, and thanks all.